Hello, this is PJ Caposey, Superintendent of Schools for Meridian 223. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to tune in and listen to the FY20 Tentative Budget presentation. What we try to do in this presentation is pretty simple. I just want to give everyone a global understanding of how the budgeting process works, where we stand financially, and if we're moving forward toward our goals in a healthy position. So let's start by taking a look at our overall data. Operating reserves are really the important funds for us. So we have 4 funds that serve as operating reserves, and what they do is they are the funds that we use on a relatively regular basis. So that would be our education fund, our operations and maintenance fund, or buildings and grounds, our transportation fund, and working cash. The other funds deal with either long-term debt, risk management, large projects that only take place occasionally, or the IMRF Social Security fund, which we use to pay the retirement portion for our non-certified employees. So as you can see, we have been relatively healthy, right? So we have about $12 million in operating reserve at the end of the fiscal year. Is that we have roughly 75% of what we spend in a given year in our operating funds as cash on hand. This puts us in a very healthy financial position. So this doesn't mean that we have too much money. It doesn't mean that our reserves are too bloated. This puts us exactly kind of where we want to be. And as you can see in FY17 through FY20, that's kind of why we've maintained right near that 75% threshold to keep us in a healthy position, but not in one that's taking advantage of our tax. You can see that each year we run a surplus or deficit, and there's been a ton of extenuating circumstances helping to explain why we are where we are. We project to run a surplus in this coming year of about $330,000, which is a good, healthy surplus for us that allows us to make some maneuvers toward the end of next fiscal year, where if we were healthy in terms of everything moving along according to plan, that maybe we can do some summer projects and amend the budget to do so toward the end. So it gives us a little bit of that wiggle room, but also has enough cash on hand that if we have an issue with a boiler or something else goes wrong facility-wise, that we have the ability to take care of that and make that purchase without putting us into a deficit budget. You'll see that we ended up in a surprise deficit position for FY19. The reason will be explained in further slides, but it is not something that's going to have a long-term impact on us. So in order to understand that, I need to help walk us through what happened in fiscal year. We had some unexpecteds. We had uneven Ogle County tax payments. I try to explain this every year. This is the first time that it happened in this manner. We get paid for tax year, whatever tax year it is. So for this year, we're going to be in tax year 18 in this fiscal year. We get one payment in FY19, and then the remainder of the payments in FY20. The payment we get in FY19, so for us, that was June of 2019, we received roughly 45% of what we're due. What we have been getting is largely 55, 56% in that June payment. So the June payment's been big, and then we have a smaller portion that comes to us in the following fiscal year. And that's fine if that happens year over year over year. But this year what happened is we had a big June payment in 2017, which meant that we ended up with about 44 to 45% of what we should get throughout the course of the year in the remaining payments. Then we got about 45% again. So that means that we ended up about $700,000 short of what was budgeted. Now, it's not a big deal because we'll just make that up in the next payments. Maybe potentially by the time you're listening to this. It only impacts us because we operate in the fiscal year. So it has zero cash flow impact. It has a fiscal year impact. The state's also been awesome. So we complained about the state for several years. State's been really good. We can't argue about that. And the fact that we have been running healthy allowed us to attack about $1 million in building work, including a major roof repair. You'll see new landscaping when the school year starts, painting throughout several buildings, able to replace the high school athletic complex lights. For some people, when I've talked to them, they said that sounded like a luxury item. The light, we looked to get the lights repaired and we were told that nobody would touch the lights because the poles were rotting from the inside out. So we had to get those out as a liability issue, and we made the transition to LED in several of the main corridors, which will be an initial cost, but a long-term cost savings, and we're able to repair the track. Again, just repair to kind of go into deeper detail with the tax payments. We get all the money that we levied for. The county always takes care of us. We have a 99+% collection rate, so everything is good. The fact that our fiscal year closes June 30 just means that sometimes our books are going to depend on this. So the numbers that I share with you are from July 1 to June 30. So in that time, we really projected about $700,000 short on revenue compared to what we anticipated. Some of that was made up in the previous fiscal year, and some of it will be made up in the next fiscal year. So we will be whole. It's a net zero for us. It just looks different in the. So here you'll see this is a big, busy spreadsheet, and so I'll talk slow so you have some time to consume it. What this does is walk you through where we started in FY19. Again, these are unaudited numbers, so they'll be tweaked a little bit, maybe a percentage point here or there off. Unaudited revenue, unaudited expenditures, where we're at in terms of our balance, and then what we're going to project moving forward. So again, we had an unexpected deficit budget from last year as a result of the tax payments, and we will project to have a surplus for next year, even with some deficit spending that we project to have in buildings and grounds. That's an intentional deficit spending in that individual fund so that we can fund the roofing project that is taking place. So next I want to get into actually how I go about building the budget. It's actually pretty simple. There's two separate but related processes. We look at expenditures and we look at revenues. The expenditures are interesting because it's very time bound. So the way that we cut expenditures in schools is because we're not extravagant here. We don't have an abundance of supplies or big projects going on, or we're not doing big building projects every year. These are all, everything that we can really cut is in humans. So we have to make our budgetary decisions in terms of reduction, in terms of trying to control our expenditures by February or March of the year before, whereas revenue, we still haven't gotten the firm number as to what we're going to receive from the state at this point. So it's an interesting process. So you construct the two kind of together, but those Venn diagrams aren't always as overlapped as we would hope. Again, the expenditures, we can be pretty precise. I mean, so I can get down to the penny in terms of what we project, what we will spend on teachers, and I can get, again, within a few percentage points on what we're going to spend on support staff, again, barring the need for overtime, etc. And then we have soft numbers like energy, right? So I can project that really well because I have trends now over time, but it's never going to be exactly precise. And then we also budget, and I've said this year over year, we budget conservative on our revenue, and we budget expecting something to go wrong, right? Like, so we inflate the budget a very small percentage, maybe 1 to 2%, in case we blow a boiler, or in case there's a massive roof project that needs to get done. Those things that we don't necessarily foresee, just to protect ourselves. And again, the revenue, it's driven by the levy and general state aid. So the levy is what impacts you guys. You will see that your tax rate is the lowest since we passed the referendum. Currently, it doesn't mean you're paying less, it just means your tax rate's less, right? So the tax rate is then multiplied against the value of your house. If your value of your house is increasing, it obviously does its thing, but the tax rate itself is what we control as a school, and it's the lowest since the referendum was passed. General state aid is in good shape because of the state, so as the state does its job, then we can offer some tax relief. Grant funding, fees and payments, and other miscellaneous revenue, but the big two are the two up top. So this is what I say over and over again. We can control expenditures. We have very little control over revenue, which is a very interesting thing. So all of this budget numbers I put in front of you is great. If the governor comes out and says they're funding schools at 94% of what was agreed to, then it pretty much all goes out the window, and they get to pretty much tell us that whenever they want to. So we're playing at a disadvantage, right? Like, so it's not as systematic as you would hope in terms of things when you're dealing with a complex budget. And the state fundings, again, two things we get. We get general state aid. It used to be really based on attendance, as you can see there, the total attendance average of the best 3 months over the past 3 years. That is now being transformed into enrollment. So that's a huge, huge benefit for us. And then categoricals are based on things that essentially we already pay out, and then the state pays us back on. And again, they get historically behind, and then they'll catch up. So 1 year we receive 2 categorical payments. We're supposed to receive 4. The next year is 3, so they're behind 3. So this year we receive 5. So it's very hard to budget. I budget for 3, and then if it's more, then obviously it's a benefit. If it's less, it's usually not 1. So I'm usually just off by 1 categorical dip. So here's a quick fund by fund explanation for those of you that are still with me. I appreciate you sitting through 11.5 minutes of me talking about this. Fund 10, as I've talked to you about, is our education fund. And so what I've listed here are all the things that come into the revenue. This is where the referendum money came into. So I think one of the important things I want you to see through this is that we are trying the best that we can to be fiscally responsible and to save as much money as possible, because ultimately here in a couple of years, we're going to have the question of whether we try to renew the referendum, extend it ad infinitum, reduce it and renew it, whatever that happens to be. What is for sure is that we can't live and be a really competitive school without any of that additional revenue. So we're living as tight as we can and trying to put money away, but we're still not putting away the entire amount of the referendum typically annually, or at least we don't project to this year. And so as expenses continue to increase, which they do, right? It's life, cost of living, energy, all of those things continue to increase. So this is the big kind of strategic decisions that we're trying to make as an administration and a board, is how do we go through this in the future. Obviously, Fund 10 money is spent on really anything that you should related. Fund 20 is where buildings and grounds and facilities go. That is funded in a handful of ways, but you'll see the big expenditures that come out of there. So that's everything that you see in terms of custodians, maintenance, building upkeep, gas, electric. So all the operational stuff that keeps us going. Fund 30 is just a flow through. So it's our long-term debt. So Fund 30 is our credit card payment, what we know we're going to have to pay, we tax for, it comes into us, we send it off the next day, it flows through very quickly. Fund 40 is transportation. We've talked about that a little bit already. We have a very healthy, transportation is our healthiest fund in terms of what we have in as a fund balance compared to what we expend each year, which is why we felt comfortable extending ourselves to do the project this year. Fund 50 is retirement for non-certified employees, so non-teachers, non-administrators. This essentially just flows through again, so we can tax whatever we want to on this. We are intentionally, before this administration and board arrived, they had built up reserves in this fund. There's really no purpose in building up those reserves, so we're spending that down to give some relief to the taxpayers currently. Fund 60 is what we can do for capital projects, and so these are big projects that come up intended to largely be based on new enrollment. So as new construction or new things come into the area, then we get a little bit of money per new construction. As that money comes in, then we can spend it. Really, the only project we've used this in the last 5 to 7 years were the locker project at the high school. Fund 70 is working cash. So we levy for that, and then working cash allows us to distribute it to other funds in times of kind of trial or tribulation. And so right now we are stockpiling that money, but we are in terms of trying to build up our reserve, our operating reserve, we're not. Fund 80 is tort, anything to do with risk management. We have the ability to tax for like up to roughly $1 million in tort. We do just about half of that, and we pay for what we can. So anything in terms of workman's comp insurance, some lawyer bills, a portion of our special ed cooperative payment comes out of there. So anything that you can think of that's tortious, liability-driven risk management comes through this and flows through, in addition to a portion of a handful of employees' salaries that deal with this as a large portion of their job. And Fund 90 is health, life, safety, called fire prevention and safety in terms of the code. This is where we received a large amount of money and expended it to do the building projects that you saw 2 years ago, those 200 line items of work that got done. So hopefully this helps a little bit about what we consider as we're building the budget and what the tentative budget looks out there. Right now, again, I would say that if you had to take anything away from this, we're in a really healthy position. We're set up to kind of get us to where the referendum extinguishes, and we have to make up some really critical decisions here in the next couple of years to figure out how we can continue to build our district to be, to live that vision, to keep with our small town values, but try to achieve world-class results, how we can do that in a fiscally responsible manner in order to take care of the taxpayers and so that we can best serve them. So those are the big questions that we'll have to be answering in the next year or two. As for now, we're in a really healthy position. Thank you for your time. My contact information is there. Please feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have. Thanks for sitting through these 16 minutes. It's appreciated.